Welcome to Modern Farm Business Podcast. This podcast is designed to help the farm leader bring their business to the next level. We'll cover everything from leadership and finance to strategy and planning. I'm your host, Dean Hefta. One of the most frequent areas of frustration, not only on the farm, but for people in business and life in general, revolves around communication. When it goes wrong, misunderstanding, assumptions, strained or even broken relationships end up as the result. But when it goes right, we have more energy, more creativity, better understanding, and less stress in our life. And that's why I'm so excited to start this series on communication with our guest today, Joseph Grenny. He's a 4-time New York Times bestselling author, keynote speaker, and leading social scientist for business performance. He is co-author of the multi-million selling books Crucial Conversations, Influencer, Crucial Accountability, and Change Anything. For the past 30 years, Joseph has conducted social science research with the goal to help leaders and organizations achieve new levels of performance. Joseph, welcome to the program.
Hey, good morning, Dean. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, we're happy to have you. Your book, Crucial Conversations, is about talking when stakes are high. Every day on the farm can include high-stakes conversations. It might be with family, employees, even suppliers. What do I need to know and do as a leader to make sure I handle those tough issues well?
Well, the first thing is to get out of denial. You know, I think one of the things we discovered in our research is that first of all, these moments where you have to talk about something that is high stakes, emotionally significant, where there are divided opinions, that if you don't talk it out, you'll act it out. A lot of us are in denial because we think we can just avoid it and work around it or sugarcoat or understate. But, you know, all of us know that if we don't resolve it, we deal with it forever. And so if you don't talk it out, what you tend to do is you start behaving differently towards others. So say, for example, there's a significantly different policy or approach that you wanted on the farm than another person, and you end up not expressing it very honestly, and you end up harboring a grudge or kind of working behind somebody's back or building coalitions behind their back. So whatever fear we have of having an interpersonally uncomfortable conversation with others, it's far outweighed by the damage it will cause and the price we'll pay by avoiding it.
Okay, what do you suppose for a lot of us when we're avoiding just talking it out or talking about it? What is that fear? You mentioned there's a fear in us. What do you suppose it is that we really have to address and that we have to overcome to just talk it out?
Part of it is just hardwiring. So our bodies and our brains are wired for survival. They aren't wired for long term. So we didn't survive as a species to today because our brains evolved to plan for retirement or to think about whether the roof is going to leak next rainy season. What we're primarily wired for is if there's a rattlesnake in the bushes and we hear a hiss, that we go into action immediately. And so we have this defensive response that we typically take. And in moments that are emotionally charged, that same sort of thing takes over. And all we think about is, how can I get out of danger, not how can I actually solve a problem? So the first thing you got to do is overcome your natural reflex, which is avoidance or combat. Is one or the other of those damaging approaches that we tend to take in that moment. If we can start recognizing that we have these crucial conversations and that there are paths to success, paths that we've already taken before, we've all had moments where we actually did much better than we otherwise would, and it worked out well. What our book describes and what our research has discovered is what those paths are so that you can do them consciously and repeatably in the moments when it matters the most.
Yeah, so I need to be very self-aware of my own patterns so that I can recognize where might I end up going. In the book, you refer to it as some people have a tendency towards silence and some towards what you refer to as violence. And there's different types of that, isn't there?
Correct, yeah. So in the book, we have a little assessment you can take, and you can actually go to a website, crucialskills.com, where you can take the free assessment as well. And what it'll do is help you see what's your tendency. Do I tend to move towards silence or violence? But equally significantly, what form? Do I tend to understate or move towards sarcasm, or do I move to control or labeling? And so there are different subtle forms it takes. And honestly, Dean, it takes different forms in different contexts. So with my spouse, I might move one direction, but with my boss or with a direct report, I might go in another. So the assessment's very helpful so that you can become more conscious in those moments when you're about to do your worst when it matters most.
That makes sense. In the book, you also mentioned the phrase, when it's safe, you can say anything. Could you expand on that?
This is one of the most revolutionary findings from our research. We spent about 10,000 hours watching people hold crucial conversations, and many people do it magnificently in spite of the fact that they were dealing with really difficult, divisive issues. So, for example, if you've got somebody on the farm that you've decided is just incompetent in their position, the position has outgrown them. Or perhaps they're declining in their performance. They're not paying as much attention. So you got to really deal with a tough performance issue and let somebody know that they're not making the grade. Many of us believe that a topic that risky you could probably never broach without somebody getting defensive and it turning into an ugly confrontation. Our research shows that that is absolutely, flatly not correct. The truth is that in those moments, if you can create psychological safety for yourself and the other person, you can talk with almost anyone about almost anything. The challenge is not to understate your point, to apologize for the concerns that you have, but just to create psychological safety so that people feel that your intentions are good. So that's the key. When we feel safe, we can hear things from others. And we all know this. We have people who've given us feedback before that really triggered us, and we got upset and angry. And it might have just been, well, you left your dental floss on the counter. You know, something really trivial and insignificant. But we blow it out of proportion. And other times where somebody might tell you, gosh, you know, you really are doing a miserable job on this project, but we're able to hear it. And the difference is not in the content they're sharing. It's in how safe we feel with the person that's sharing it.
That makes a lot of sense. So what is something I should make sure I do or maybe don't do when it comes to first creating that psychological safety?
Yeah, the book describes a dozen or so tactics, but let me just describe the principles. You feel safe with somebody when you know two things. Now, please notice how I phrased that. I didn't say when they do a couple of little tricks. I said when you know two things. So your job is to help them know these things in whatever way you have to communicate them. The first is they have to know that you care about their interests, their problems, their concerns, almost as much as they do. You have what you call a mutual purpose, that you share some common goals and interests. If they believe that, if they really believe that you don't intend them harm, think about it for a moment. You and I will let somebody put a needle into our arm, put us to sleep, and then take a sharp instrument and cut us open to do surgery on us if we trust them. We'll let people do things that are immensely painful to us if we think they have our best interests at heart. And so if we'll let somebody do that to us physically, think of what we can possibly be able to accomplish psychologically and socially with each other if we just feel safe. So that's the first thing you got to do, is make sure they believe that you have good intentions. The second thing is you need to create a condition called mutual respect. They need to know not just that you care about their interests, problems, and concerns, but that you care about and respect them as a human being. Even if they're behaving despicably, even if they're doing something that you don't like. If they believe those two things, they'll exhale, they'll relax, and they'll begin to listen, even if they disagree with you. So these aren't tricks to persuade people. These are just ways to help people listen to you. And then the strength of your argument will determine whether or not it emerges victorious or something at the end or gets considered. But when people know those two things, that's when they can start to listen and dialogue happens. But when they don't, that's when they start to arch their back, dig in their feet, fight against your point, withdraw, and all those other games start to take place.
That is so powerful. But I am human, and sometimes as hard as I try, things just don't go the way I'd hoped. Yeah, I say something I regret. How do I apologize the right way?
You know, that's a wonderful illustration of this principle of safety. The reason apologies are important is because they have the potential, at least, of restoring safety. So when you do something that I find offensive or hurtful, the reason that becomes an issue is because I begin to believe you don't have a mutual purpose with me. I can't trust your intentions. Or I believe you don't respect me as a person. So that's what's been damaged. And so the purpose of an apology is to restore that sense of mutual purpose and mutual respect. Now, as a friend of mine used to say, you can't talk yourself out of problems you behave yourself into, so an apology has a limited life value, shelf life. It's not going to work well the third and fourth and fifth time, but the first time or the second time, it can be meaningful because what it shows you is I care more about your trust than my ego. It's a way of sacrificing ego and demonstrating I'm willing to do one of the most painful things to a human being, which is acknowledge that I was wrong because I care that much about being right with you. And so if it's done appropriately, it starts to rebuild a sense that you can trust my intentions and that you can trust my respect, and therefore you can feel safe with me.
That is a great illustration of how those really go back to what you illustrated is so important about being able to say anything. And we experience that even with businesses that we do business with. If they apologize well, it rebuilds the understanding of our relationship they have with us and for us and the respect. And so a lot of times that relationship, I find, gets stronger after you've done something wrong.
Yeah, it's usually at the moments of emotional risk that how somebody behaves informs most our belief about whether or not we can trust them. So if somebody's failed to meet a commitment, it's at that moment that I start wondering, well, was that just an honest accident? Was it circumstances beyond their control? Or do they just not care about me and my problem? That's what's going on in our minds. There really is this survival part of our brain that's trying to ask, are you a foe or are you a friend? At a very primal level. And so since I'm so vulnerable and since I'm so attentive in that moment, how you show up will affect my trust in you more than any other moment could have. If you had kept 10 promises in a row, it wouldn't have built our trust as much as how you respond in this moment. So when we over-respond, when we apologize, when we take responsibility, when we try to repair the breach, that really builds trust even faster if we seize that moment.
Perfect. I want to shift gears a little bit and touch on another one of my favorite books of yours, and that's Influencer. You note in that book that geniuses focus on behaviors. Why is focusing on behaviors so important?
Well, a lot of us, when we're trying to build an organization, try to think about, vague values, saying we want to be a place that is honesty, integrity, and respect, or something like that. The problem with that, if you're bringing in new employees and trying to help them learn to behave in a way that's going to satisfy customers and achieve your business goals, most of them would look at themselves and say, you know what, I'm already honest, I already have integrity, I already have respect for other people, done deal. And so values really don't change behavior much when we talk about them at that abstract level. What changes behavior is when you turn it into a very concrete, specific behavioral maxim. And so, for example, if you go into a hospital and the hospital is trying to create a sense of safety and connection and rapport with you immediately, teaching people to smile, to make eye contact, to ask about your situation, to encourage them to let you know if you see anything that you're confused or uncomfortable with. Those very specific behaviors start to create a sense of respect. They show that we're professional. And so as a leader, you need to be very articulate about the specific behaviors you're trying to foster and not just this high-level abstractions and values.
That is really powerful because in our mind as a leader, when we say you need to take care of the customer, that could mean 100 different things to 100 different people. So you're saying we just have to get really specific. When I say take care of the customer, these are some things that we do here to take care of the customer.
Yeah, here's how we differentiate ourselves. When I go to Krispy Kreme donuts, they're pretty specific. They're going to have somebody with a tray of wonderful, soft, sugary donuts standing out there handing me one. And that's how I'm going to know that I'm in a special place that cares about making me happy. And so you've got to translate it into a very specific, what we call vital behavior.
Yeah, that makes me think about, you noted the power of deliberate practice. And in farming, we have a very seasonal annual activity. Our business cycle is 1 year long. And there's a saying that farmers only get 40 chances. What are the advice that you have on deliberate practice if you only get one chance at business each year?
Well, deliberate practice is about changing behavior, and the reason it's an important concept when you're trying to influence behavior change is a lot of us think that when people aren't behaving the way we would like them to, that the real issue usually is a lack of motivation. They just don't have the gumption, the commitment, the willpower, the want to. And so what we tend to do is reprove them. We tend to give negative feedback. We tend to punish or discipline, or we tend to bribe. We offer bonuses, and all of these are motivational tactics. What we don't realize is many of the behavioral problems that we're frustrated with on our farms or in our businesses are not due to a lack of motivation, but a lack of ability. In the Influencer book, we describe how to address those ability issues, and one of those tactics is deliberate practice. It's just giving people an opportunity under realistic conditions to practice the behavior we want them to engage in. So I'll give you a quick healthcare example. In hospitals, one of the most common ways that we injure patients is through falls. So you've had surgery, you're not mobile enough, you get up, you try to go to the bathroom, and you fall down and you hit your head. This happens, thousands of times across the United States every single day. We also know that the best way to keep patients safe is to just do a quick check. So when they're admitted to your floor and go into a room, what you need to do is test them for mobility, classify them, and then put a sign on the door that lets you know which patients should not get up and go to the bathroom without assistance, and then treat them accordingly. But those quick checks are rarely done. So we found a hospital one time where only 5% of the time the nurses were doing the quick checks, and therefore falls were happening far too often. And the leaders thought this was a motivation problem. They said, for crying out loud, people know how to do the quick check. They're just not doing it. They just don't care enough. So apparently we need to inspect more often, hold them accountable, write them up when they fail to do this. And we came in and suggested, why don't you explore ability? Maybe this is an ability issue as well. What we found is that on many of the floors of the hospital, the nurses took 2 to 4 minutes to do a quick check, whereas on the floors where they more often had mobility issues, it took about 30 seconds. Now, if you think about it, 2 to 4 minutes may not sound like much, but to a nurse, a busy nurse, that's an eternity. And so you've got an ability problem. Some are slow and some are faster at it. So what do? The first thing we did is we start to recognize there's an ability issue here. And then we created an opportunity for deliberate practice. We had the nurses who could do it in 30 seconds hold a quick check rodeo. We had them take all the other nurses, have them practice under realistic conditions with one another as nurses, pretending to be patients, and actually do quick checks until everyone could do it in 30 seconds. Guess what happens? Within a week, 90% of the quick checks are being done, and it stayed that way for 6 months. So the big opportunity that the Influencer book offers to leaders is learning to recognize when you have an ability issue to address, not a motivation issue, and creating little opportunities for brief practice episodes with immediate feedback can very quickly address that.
That's great insight, because it is so easy for us to focus on the person, and whether it's their values or their motivation or whatever it is. And then that begins this whole cycle of breaking down this mutual respect in the relationship, and really doesn't lead anywhere positive. So really important for us to focus on what are those specific abilities that we need to make sure that they have.
Correct. Yeah.
Joseph, as we wrap up, I'd like your perspective on, if there's one thing that when people leave a conversation with you, what is it that you really want them to understand?
Boy, you mean under the topic of crucial conversations, or just about my work in general?
Let's go to your work in general. You've seen so much that impacts organizations and leaders positively, whether it's on stuff we've touched on today or something that you just really want to make sure people leave understanding. What's something you want to highlight?
Oh, I'd be happy to answer that question. The premise and the primary finding of all of our work is it is possible to change the world if you can change behavior. And it is possible to change behavior. Many of us despair, and we've tried and we feel like we're banging our heads. And the reason is not that we're not trying, it's that we're not competent yet. The domain of the social sciences has been accumulating a body of knowledge about how you create rapid and profound and sustainable behavior change to change our communities, to change our families, to change our organizations for decades. But most of us who are in leadership positions don't have access to that, don't understand it. And so that's why we've worked so hard to try to make accessible some of these amazing insights to help people create that kind of profound and rapid behavior change, sometimes in our own selves. Many times our lives could be significantly better if we just changed one simple habit. And yet we struggle and relapse and can't get to the place that we're trying to go. It is possible to do it. So what I hope people get from our work is not just hope, but confidence, the ability to think in systematic and repeatable ways about how to create real and lasting change.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's been so much insight here for us. Is there anywhere besides crucialskills.com that you would direct people if they want to learn more about your work?
Yes, vitalsmarts.com will share the whole array of things that Vital Smarts, the company I founded 30 years ago, has to offer.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Today we've been joined by Joseph Grenny, a 4-time New York Times bestselling author, speaker, and amazing social scientist. Thank you so much for the work you've done and for sharing it with our audience.
You're very welcome. It's a pleasure to talk with you, Dean.
Wow. Excellent insights from Joseph. Appreciate so much what he brought to the table today. A handful of things really stood out for me. The first is, when you know there's an issue, talk it out with the person. Have the conversation about what you're concerned about or what you're seeing, and go into it knowing yourself better. Do you have a tendency to avoid the issue, or maybe you have a tendency to get really aggressive and what he would call move into a combat type mode? Know yourself and talk it out. Second thing is building psychological safety. In those relationships that we have, making sure that we're sharing and people know how much we care for them and for their success. And also, we have this mutual respect that regardless of what they do, I accept them as a person. There is this mutual respect. And finally, recognizing how possible it is to make change in the world by working on our own behaviors. Change really begins with us. Thanks again for joining me. You can get more information on the things that we touched on today in the show notes for this episode. Be sure to subscribe to this wherever you get your podcasts to be a part of Modern Farm Business Podcast each week, and tell your friends about what we're doing here. And if you have any thoughts or ideas, send me a note at dean@modernfarmbusiness.com. Thanks for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you again next week.